Hey, welcome to Life in the Leadership Lane. I'm your host, Bruce Waller, where we are talking to leaders that are making a difference in the workplace and in the community. What did they do to get started, and what are they doing to stay there? What are they doing to stay on track? And today, I have a very special guest. We're going to talk to Ed Curtis. Ed Curtis is the founder and CEO of YTexas. Ed launched YTexas after 20 years of banking in the private sector business, where he held various positions such as market CEO, chief lending officer, and CEO. And he's also an author. And I'm excited to have him on the show today. So thanks for joining me today, Ed. Appreciate you being here.
It's great to be here, Bruce.
So I know Christine Pacheco actually introduced us on LinkedIn. So grateful for her for introducing us.
Yeah, we used to work together at Sterling Bank back in, a long time ago.
So let's just kind of dive in. I want to talk a lot today about YTexas, but I want to start with your journey. And I would love to hear your story about just how you started your career and how you've kind of navigated your way to the role of CEO.
Yeah, it all started back in my banking days. I moved to Texas from New York back in 1993. Real strong New York accent, young kid, just kind of looking to take my life to the kind of a next level. And I was lucky enough to get into a bank training program at Comerica Bank. I was a little bit older than most of the kids at that time, because I had graduated college, spent a couple of years working in New York, and immersed myself in the banking community for 20 plus years, and worked my way up to the management level. And kind of had a midlife crisis, wanted to work for myself, had an idea, and been doing that for the last 7 years.
So 1993, so you obviously, that was after college, after you relocated, so with Comerica. Was that a corporate relocation at that time?
No, they were actually still headquartered in Detroit at the time. So they had relocated headquarters after that, but they bought into a couple banks and got into Texas before I had moved here. But yeah, I moved here after I had graduated college and worked in Manhattan for a few years. Kind of have an interesting story as to how I got introduced to Dallas, but made the trip here and started my career here. Yeah.
Hey, I love Manhattan. I've been in Manhattan before, and absolute incredible city. So I always love to ask this question because, it seems like as we're going through our career, some of us I call it finding your lane, finding your purpose. Many of us, we find it early in our careers, and then others, we find it a little bit later. And I was just curious, can you share that moment when you found your lane, found your purpose? You knew that, this is what I want to do in my career.
I fell in love with banking as soon as I became a loan officer, because to be a banker is it's a really interesting mix of skill sets. You need to be out meeting people, hustling new business, but then you also need to be kind of understanding the underlying credentials of the company and determining whether or not they're going to be a good borrower. So, they had the 5 C's of credit, which I don't remember all of them now, but it was obviously collateral, but character was a big part of that. And I really, really enjoyed it. Now, I was a New Yorker in Texas, so again, at the time, just navigating everyday life as a as a newcomer was interesting. But meeting new people, meeting different industry, learning more about different industries, and then having to come back and determine whether or not you could provide a loan for them. Then you had to sell the loan to the loan committee and convince them that you understood that company up and down. And then if you were lucky enough to get the loan approved, then you had to go back to the client and sell to them why they need to be banking with you. So it was a really interesting mix of, understanding the person, character, ethics, underwriting the nuts and bolts of it, and then selling to different parties,
That's fantastic. I remember when I was I was taking my HR certification years ago when I was the president of Dallas HR. And I remember the instructor came in and the very first thing she said is, you need to know the business.
Yep.
You need to know the business. And that's what you're talking about. You were obviously in an environment to where you had that opportunity to not just learn your role, but the business of banking, right?
You did, but you really had to understand the person behind it or the people behind it, and dealt with a lot of family-owned businesses, of course, dealt with private equity-owned businesses, which is a little different animal. But it's really the character was a big, big, big piece of the underwriting. And, one of the rules in banking is you got to trust your gut. And if you're touring the facility or you're meeting the owners and you're meeting the next generation of maybe as they're passing the business on to their family, and just really observing and understanding, is this a good person, somebody that's going to pay back the loan in good times and bad? Usually someone's character comes out in the bad times, and how they'll deal with the bank, and are they trustworthy and honest? And it's some element of intangible. You just have to have that good gut feeling, and then you've got to go back to the bank and convince them that you've understood that there is an element of risk here that you can't control, and that's the trustworthiness of this person. So you really had to convince the bank that you were a good judge of character, and you checked all the boxes. So it's not a perfect science. I mean, lending, you could lend money to the best company and end up losing money, and then vice versa.
That's very interesting. And as I think about that, I think many times, a lot of times we don't know that as a young leader. And many times we're taught that. So I'm thinking, what leads me to think, were there some key like mentors that helped you during your career? And what were some common traits about those mentors?
I was thinking about this before the interview, and I really don't have one mentor. Obviously, most people talk about their family, and I have a wonderful mother and father who are still, I'm lucky enough they're still here. And they're both amazing people that taught me a lot. In my professional career, I learned from good bosses, bad bosses, good people, not so good people. It's just life, you're dealing with all kinds of people. But I really, I think I learned from everyone. And I actually probably learned more from the bosses that, maybe I didn't fit in with as much, because, you learn from people that you disagree with. So the journey of really understanding, who you are and how you want to lead is, sometimes it's not just one person, it's a bunch of different people. And it's usually the people that you don't agree with.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. Learning from people that maybe, I always say, look for the good and you'll see good.
Yeah.
Even people that aren't in alignment with the values that you want to see in a leader, you learn so much from those people as well. I talk to people all the time about networking. Even, a lot of times you have to kind of navigate through to meet a lot of different people. Some people you just don't align with, but you can always learn something from those people, right?
Yeah. And I mean, not to get too deep into this, but I think as a society, we just need to operate that way. We're very obviously divided in many different opinions. And I just always been the type of person that, I respect everyone's opinion, and whether you agree with them or not, most people don't change their mind with things. And it's not your job to necessarily change somebody else's mind. It's just understand where they're coming from and try to relate to them.
That's fantastic. I love that. Now, you're in banking. Are you still in banking today? I know that you are the founder and CEO of YTexas. Talk a little bit about that. How did that kind of start, and what's that all about?
I mean, it started. I just again, as I progressed through my career, I was kind of interested in trying to venture outside of banking. I didn't necessarily want to make a full career out of it, but I was getting older, and I just wasn't necessarily in the stage of my life where I wanted to take huge risks. but I was very, very enamored with economic development. And economic development is a very wide term, but ever since I moved to Texas in '93, first of all, I was enamored with the pride of people in Texas about how they just, you're almost a Texan first, more than anything. And I also saw that most of the people that I met in Texas weren't necessarily from Texas. And those were the people hanging the Texas flag, higher than others because they, maybe have come from a different culture and environment and seem to, love everything that Texas stood for when it comes to, just being prideful and where you live and where you do business. And I was just interested in it. And I went through a class called Leadership Dallas, and I know all the cities have those. And one of the classes called Regionalism really caught my attention. And they did a case study on what happened to Dallas when they lost the bid for Boeing. Boeing was considering relocating their headquarters to Dallas Fort Worth, and they thought they had it in the bag. And at the last minute, they found out that they decided not to come to Dallas. And it was a case study on, what was it that we didn't provide? It was cost effective, centrally located throughout the United States. They checked all the boxes, but at the end of the day, it was really, I think, the culture that they were looking for, and they didn't understand Texas. And that was kind of a transformation, I think, that the state and its economic development department really had to kind of re-examine itself and say, are we really the J.R. Ewing, of the United States? And we're not all cowboys, and we're a lot more progressive than most people think. And I think that's really when they started shifting their outlook on, I wonder what other people think about Texas. So that interested me. And then at that time, Rick Perry was governor. He was very, very active in economic development. They say he was one of those guys that could go out and shake hands and have a beer with a CEO and convince them to move to Texas on a very, very personalized basis. And that I was just interested in it, really. So I spent about a year with an organization called Texas One. At the time, today they're called Go Big in Texas. And it's basically the marketing arm of the state of Texas, all privately funded. It's funded with taxpayer dollar. It's not funded with taxpayer dollars, meaning organizations pay to help this organization promote the state of Texas. So I spent about a year doing that and spending time with small delegations of people traveling around the United States. We even went to China, other parts of the world, selling Texas on the benefits of moving and relocating and living here. And that sparked the idea of my forming an organization that essentially helps them after they move here.
Wow, that's fantastic. So were you working at Sterling at that time?
Yeah, I was still in banking.
Okay.
And it was just kind of a nonprofit organization like we would all, participate with. And I did that at the time, same time.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, that is fantastic. And so that was, you founded it, was that 2013? Is that the year that was founded?
Yeah, it was around 2012, 2013. Yeah.
Okay. So, wow, 7 years and you're still going. And so
Yes.
how are, I saw where the mission, I was reading about the mission of YTexas, and the mission is to be relevant and a reliable resource for companies relocating to Texas. What are you finding that people are looking for from your organization? What are you able to help these companies with?
It's really just an unbiased opinion on, what it's like to do business here and how to succeed based on whatever your goals are. And what I mean by unbiased is in economic development, as you know, you're in the industry, it's luring you to a particular city or a particular state. And there's, of course, incentives and all kinds of things involved. And each city wants you to move to their city because you'll bring jobs and you'll, enhance their economic development. Our approach is really more inward to the company. And it's, what are your goals? What do you want? What questions do you have? What can we do in an unbiased way? Meaning it doesn't matter where in Texas you decided to move. There are a lot of things that you need to know, a lot of people you need to meet that can help you out, and it's really in an unbiased way. So, and to be reliable, meaning, you know, we deliver. If you need something, we will deliver on it quickly and honestly. And reliable is just, you know, it's coming from a reliable source.
So I had Jessica Hare on one of our shows, and she was fantastic. And of course, she's in charge of the Say Yes to Dallas campaign. And so we were talking about, you know, companies trying to attract organizations into these different cities. But YTexas is more about, they've already decided to actually relocate. Now you want to try to help them actually connect. Am I accurate on that?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, in some cases, we deal with companies that are thinking about moving here, but we're not really. When I founded the organization, I wanted to respect. I think the economic development model in the state of Texas is far better than any other state, and I think, you know, the competitive nature obviously breeds a good product. But at the end of the day, the client also wants kind of like an unbiased opinion on, you know, just how to kind of navigate the state. So we decided, you know, let's let the recruiters do their job. And then once they decide where they're moving, you know, then we can kind of come in and help them understand the landscape in the state of Texas. And in the very beginning, my goal and the organization's goal was really to not, you know, and every startup says this, not to have a competitor, but really it's just to be, you know, if you look at our marketing collateral, we have, you know, the YTexas logos in the middle, and then all of our strategic partners or people that we work with are all, you know, around the center of our organization, Chambers being one. Any organization, obviously, you know, Armstrong, any organization that can help somebody that's moving into Texas, we want to be kind of a part of our web, so to speak. So the Chambers in Texas are some of the best in the world, or definitely in the country. And we love the work that they do. And we just want to help, you know, help any way we can.
I think it's fantastic, and I always talk about, you know, it's nice. I was thinking about companies that even relocate here. Me and you were talking offline, even with Texas SHRM. You know, Texas SHRM has 32 SHRM chapters within the state of Texas. There's a SHRM chapter for HR leaders in pretty much most every community. And many times what we find is that companies will get here, but they don't know that there is a local resource to help with networking, to help with finding talent, different things like that. They're often aware of the national resource, but that local resource allows them to get to know people in the community. And
Absolutely.
it's a great opportunity even for like Texas SHRM to be able to help along the way.
Yeah, and local chapters of organizations that you may be a part of are definitely a big part of what we do as well. So just like you said, I'm sure there were members of SHRM where they came from, but the local chapter president and getting to know the people here locally, you know, believe it or not, it's not that it's not a priority, but there are much bigger priorities that these companies are dealing with, whether it's, you know, getting their employees here, situating their own families, obviously, you know, keeping business rolling. You know, the board of directors usually has lofty goals for these companies, so they need to hit the ground running. And a lot of these things, sometimes they put on the back burner and they realize maybe a couple of years later, you know what, I do need to get a hold of my local SHRM chapter. I do need to be a little bit more involved in whether it's legislative issues or whatever, you know, they had interest in where they came from, even their personal lifestyle. A lot of that they put on the back burner. Maybe they play tennis or golf, and they haven't really, you know, kind of thought about that. Those are just things that we kind of bring to the front of the table so that they prioritize, you know, all the things that they're going to be responsible for.
Oh, that's a great point. Just another thing I noticed you've really built this organization up, you and your team with, you even have looks like a YTexas summit and some, just continuing to find ways to expand and really create a good experience for anybody that's involved in YTexas.
That, you know, that's one, again, I started my own business in my low to mid 40s. So it's definitely a lot harder than I had expected. And I knew it was going to be hard. I tell people all the time, it costs twice as much money and it's going to take twice as long as you think to get where you need to get. But always looking for a better way to do what you're doing and paying attention to the market and really paying attention to the consumer and the client. And what are they not getting from the market that other people are missing the boat on? And that's always changing, especially today. So, you know, the fact that you're doing a podcast is a perfect example. I mean, I truly believe that, you know, small businesses, startups, entrepreneurs that are always looking at, you know, obviously you need to focus on the core of your business, and you just can't be scattered in all the things you do. But I think you do have to experiment, and you can't be afraid to experiment with something that might not work. And that's, you know, kind of what we're doing with our summit and some of the events that we've done over the years. Some things have worked, some things have not, but at least you're trying, you know.
I love that, man. I absolutely love that. Just continuing to look for ways to elevate. So let's podcast. So you've got your own podcast. Tell us a little bit about that. What's it called, and what's that all about?
It's called the CEO Insider Podcast. Okay. And, you know, the goal of the podcast is really just to get CEOs talking about what it's like to do business in Texas. You know, I would say our audience, you know, what's unique about what we're doing is, of course, our audience, or our core audience, or people that are new to the state. But it's so funny because there's so much about Texas that most people don't know. And even people that have been here forever, and, you know, I've been in Texas 27 years now, and I'm learning something new about what's happening around the state. So I'm finding that it really applies to almost anyone doing business in Texas. And we're interviewing CEOs that have interesting stories. You know, recently, obviously, we've changed, you know, some of the angle towards COVID and some of the things that are happening in our state. And it's just, you know, just learning from different innovations that CEOs are implementing now, and it's interesting. So we try to do a mix between all of the major regions in Texas to get people representative of the entire state. And we've had a little over 50 episodes, and we're still learning.
And I have a high appreciation for that now that I think this is probably going to be like episode 10, you know. And so when I hear somebody say 50 or 100, I'm like, man, that's awesome. That's a commitment. Now you've also written a book as well. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I wrote a book last year, and wasn't really planning on writing a book. Spoke to a few people in the industry that encouraged me to do it. I actually had a very short deadline, which thankfully I did, because I think the statistics show that almost everybody wants to write a book, and some people start a book, but very, very few people finish the book. So I was grateful of the deadline. But I had a couple personal goals. One, I always wanted to write a book by the time I turned 50, and that didn't happen. I ended up writing a book when I was 51. But I was lucky enough to meet Millie Brown and Tom Reale with Brown Books Publishing Group in Dallas, Texas. And they've always been good friends of mine. And Millie was involved with YTexas almost from the very beginning. And was just having a conversation with their president about Tom, about an idea I had. And he looked at me and he said, "You need to start on Monday." And I said, "Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm just so busy with so many other things." And we kind of came up with an idea, and that was, you know, let's give a couple of people a phone call and see what, you know, see how those phone calls go. And it's basically interviewing people that have moved to Texas and sharing their experiences. And the first two meetings were just far beyond what I expected. And I called Tom and I'm like, well, I guess I'm writing a book.
That's fantastic. Me and you have a couple of common threads. One is I moved to Texas from Oklahoma in 1995. So I've been here 25 years, and I'm always learning something new about Texas. Love Texas. And the second one is I also had a goal to write a book by 50. And when I got to 50, I realized I hadn't done it yet.
Right.
And I finished it at 51. And so that's fantastic. We were talking offline about one of the stories in your book. I would love for you to share the story. And I think it was Boone Pickens, it might have been, but the story, or one of your favorite stories in the book.
Yeah, there's a lot of favorite stories, but yeah, with Boone Pickens, I had known his chief of staff. He had spoken at an event that we hosted a couple years ago, and he was sick at the time. And I reached out to Jay, is his name, and I asked him if Boone would share his experience in moving to Texas, and he said he would, but he wouldn't be able to speak on the phone, so we exchanged emails. And there was one more question that I didn't ask him that I wanted him to answer. And it was after we were pretty much done. And I said, hey, Jay, really quickly, one more question. Can Boone give some advice to somebody considering moving to Texas? And I asked, everyone in the book to give that advice. And the answer usually came in, a paragraph or two paragraphs. And Boone's answer was one sentence. And it read something like, if you in Texas, if you want to run with the big dogs, you need to get out from underneath the porch. That was it, one sentence. And I looked at it and I'm like, that's perfect.
That is fantastic. I absolutely love that. So I'll put a copy of the book and the podcast in the show notes. We talk, on this show, I want to talk about leadership, and I would just love to hear. I mean, you're busy with a lot of stuff. I mean, you're the CEO for YTexas. You're involved in a lot of different things. I would love to hear if you could just share, what's a typical day in the life of Ed Curtis look like? I mean, from the time you get up till the time you end the day, are there any common practices that you do each day that help you as a leader?
I think it really all depends on the type of person you are. I'm not a routine person, which I don't pride myself in that, but I'm just not. And so some days I'm getting a lot more done than other days. But for me, I've tried to make it a point to prioritize a few things that I want to at least check the box for that day. And if I end up doing more than that, that's great. But if I do, I can't do any less than that. And I try to align that with what the responsibilities are of the organization. And I love the power of three. I don't know if you're into numbers, but I love the power of three. Everything seems to fall in place when you just focus on three things, and the three tenets of our organization, we call them community, commerce, and culture. And, they mean a lot of things for our organization, but I try to check those three boxes every day. Community, meaning, reach out and try to connect with somebody that can help out another person. And Bruce, you and I talked about this. I mean, servant leadership is all about helping out somebody else. And if you get something in return, great, but don't expect it. So a big part of our organization is, connecting people with people that need to, that they need to meet. And if that turns into something bigger, that's up to them to do. So one is making sure that I'm connecting with one of my clients or a prospect or somebody that needs to meet somebody else. Commerce, I mean, that could mean a number of things, but for me, it's usually reading up on industry and making sure I'm understanding what's happening around the state, whether it's reading an article or the business journals, all four of them, Dallas, Austin, Houston, San Antonio. I read them religiously to keep up on industry. And then culture is really, culture is kind of it's an interesting angle that we have on culture. The culture of each region in Texas is different, right? Austin and Dallas, a lot of people say, are completely different when it comes to their culture. But the heart of culture is, I think, giving back to your community and understanding what the challenges are of your community. And for us, because we are statewide, the challenges in Houston are different than the challenges in Dallas when it comes to, there's a tornado coming through and it's probably going to hit somewhere near the Houston area. They're probably hopefully not going to get directly hit, but everyone in that area, the top of their mind when they wake up this week is, how is this going to affect my business and my life? Whereas in Dallas and Austin, we're dealing with, and San Antonio, we're all dealing with different things. So just, keeping in line with what's happening culturally in each region And those are the 3 boxes: community, commerce, and culture, that I try to do every day, at least one thing in one of those 3 boxes. And it keeps someone like me at least in line somewhat.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that. I was just curious if you could just share just some advice you've been given just in your career that you like to share with others. Just some of that. I always say, what's the best advice you've received, on your journey, or what you would share with others. Could you share that?
For me, it's absolutely 100%. It's, you have to be yourself.
Mm.
And you can reach out to it for advice, and how did you do things, and how did you dress, or how did you behave, and for me and still to this day I still fight it. You have to be yourself, and you have to be genuine, and if you do that, what could go wrong? I mean, seriously, what could go wrong as long as you are yourself and you stick to your beliefs? And so many times we compromise that because we feel like if we're stepping into a situation, we need to be more formal or whatever the situation is. And for me, again, I say this, kind of tongue in cheek, coming from New York, again, at the time, I had a very strong accent. So I was always mindful of making sure that I tried to kind of smooth it out a little bit. And when you're a New Yorker, we're considered rude, but it's because we're very direct. We say what's on our mind. Sometimes it doesn't sound right. But whenever I would maybe not pay attention and be myself, and maybe, people would laugh or they loved it because it's who you are. And to this day, I try to just be myself. And, we're overcritical of ourselves sometimes. Sometimes you don't want to say things because that maybe you'll say the wrong thing, but just be yourself.
That's fantastic. I absolutely love that. As a matter of fact, when I wrote the book, Find Your Lane, that was really the premise around it. It's like, find what works for you, right? There's so many different ways to be successful. Find your way. And people will appreciate that because it'll be more genuine. So I certainly appreciate that. So the last 5 minutes or so of the podcast, I always like to call it, it's time to accelerate, and just ask you just a few more questions before we finish out. The first question I always have is, do you enjoy a book more or a podcast?
I don't really have one over the other. I don't do enough reading, and I don't listen to enough podcasts. But I do both. I do listen to podcasts and I do read. So I would probably say an even mix. I would like to say that I want to listen to, I think, more podcasts, but I'm old school. I still like to read. I still like to read a newspaper, believe it or not.
Yeah, I love a mixture as well. As a matter of fact, once the COVID pandemic came, I started listening less podcasts because I would typically listen during my commute, and I wasn't commuting anywhere, and found myself listening less. But since then, I've been more intentional about it, listening to one on my run, or try to get a good mix. How about a favorite place to go on vacation? I know you're from up in the Northeast. But is there a particular place that you like to go for vacation?
Yes. Recently, over the last several years, my wife has been very successful with a business that she has been running, and she wins contests, sales contests. And every year we get to go to Hawaii, and I've fallen in love with Hawaii, and I had never been to Hawaii before. We started going on these trips. And again, these trips were only over the last 5 or 6 years. So every year I get to go with her, and I love it. So Maui, love it.
Oh, that's fantastic. I actually have one of my goals also is to visit all 50 US states, and Hawaii is still on my list that I have not been to. So would love to get there. All right. So final question. I share that I enjoy a song by Mercy Me called Dear Younger Me. And one of the questions that it made me think about was not 10 years, not what would you give yourself as a child, because you've already advice you'd give yourself as a young person, you've already been past that period. So the question is more about Ed, 10 years older. What is he saying to Ed today?
Be patient. It's a long game. I mean, every life is a long game. And I think business is a long game. I don't know if do you listen to Gary Vee much?
I do.
I love Gary Vee.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, he's rough around the edges. I mean, I'm used to it because I'm from there. You want to talk about somebody who's themselves. I mean, he'll get in front of 10,000 people and just start dropping bombs. He doesn't care, you know, what people think. But he says that all the time. He's like, don't worry about, you know, coming up with the next, you know, Amazon. He's like, you know, he thinks, you know, too many entrepreneurs are always worried about, oh my goodness, you know, my competitor is going to run me out of business and I need to do this or I need to do that. And he really stresses that if you're really building something, it's going to take 10, 20 years to build it. And if you believe in what you're building and you just go at it every day, I mean, when you're done, it's going to be a masterpiece, right? So, I mean, that's what I would say to myself is it's a long game. Life is long. You're going to learn a lot along the way, and be patient.
That's fantastic. I actually just posted a blog. I post a blog each week on my website. And today the blog was, are we asking the right question? And it was about Simon Sinek talking about the infinite game mindset.
Yeah.
And it made me think about it because a lot of times we'll ask the question, how long is it going to take? Or when are we going to get there versus how far can we go? And at the end of the day, it's about having that mindset that just keep getting better every day. And you're just going to look back one day and then all of a sudden you're going to be an overnight success.
That's right.
And so
you can't sweat the little things.
This has been absolutely fantastic. I'm honored to have you on the show. Let me, for the people listening on the podcast or for the viewers, can you share how people could connect with you or find more information out about you or YTexas?
Yeah, just our website is YTexas.com, the letter Y, Texas.com. And most of what you can find is there. And that would be great.
Hey, listen, Ed, it's been an honor. I appreciate you coming in on the show today with me.
Anytime. I don't want to let you go, though, before I ask you a question.
Okay.
And I want to learn more about your book and why you wrote the book. And I'd like to just compare some notes because we're both about the same age, right? And we both wrote a book. We're both podcasters. We're both, you know, entrepreneurs in some way. I really want to learn more a little about your book.
Yeah, definitely.
Why you wrote it.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to connect with that. You know, I published my book in 2017. And similar story. I once heard someone talking about setting goals, and they talked about setting who goals. Who do you want to become versus the things you want to accomplish? And so I thought, you know, and so as we set those goals, they said, think about the person you want to be 10 years from now. At that time, I was 40. And so I said, okay, at 50, I want to be married for 30 years. I want to have one kid in college, two in high. So I started going down the list. I want to be a member of the President's Sales Club. I want to do all these different things. And when I turned 50, I looked at that list and I could not believe how I'd accomplished almost everything on that list with the exception of writing a book. Mm-hmm. And so it pulled me to, you know what, I'm going to make this happen this year. And so I decided to write the book and publish that. And it's been a game changer. And not just, I mean, for me personally, just going through that process. And and then in 2020, COVID happened. Yeah. And I've always been wanting to interview people like you, interview different leaders and just learn from them and share their experiences. And so I started learning Zoom and I was like, you know what? I think it's time. And I just went for it. And so The podcast is about 3 months old, and I appreciate you being in the top 10 of my guests. I've learned a lot from you today, and I appreciate you being part of this.
No, no problem. I think what you were saying just solidifies the fact that we were talking about this just being a journey, right? It's a lifelong journey. And I just feel, again, as you get older, and I remember when I was younger and some of the people that I worked for were older, they would always say that, you know, obviously when you older and wiser, right, you just gain wisdom, and, you know, giving that back in any way you can. You know, a lot of times the younger folks don't listen to older folks, but I think, you know, you just get in that stage of life where you want to give back whatever you've learned. And like you said, you reflect back and you're like, wow, I really, whether you accomplished a lot or you learned a lot, it's, I don't think you realize it as you're going through it. Right. And then when you get there, and then even when you wrote your book, I bet you had doubts of how am I going to write this book? What am I going to say? And then all of a sudden, all these things start coming out. And when you finish with the book, you're like, wow, that's pretty cool, you know. And I hope this continues for another, you know, 30, 40, 50 years. Who knows, you know, how long it will go. But you know, life is a journey, and every decade seems to just have a different angle. I'm enjoying the 50s. I think it's, you know, I had a challenge when I turned 50, but we are where we are. And I just think what you're doing is fantastic. You and I have only known each other not so long, but I can relate to you for sure.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. And I would say you're definitely driving in the leadership lane, doing some good things. And I can't wait to see what's ahead for you, my friend.
Likewise.